Today, I want to talk to you about something that is absolutely fundamental to your ability to succeed, to learn, and even to feel fulfilled, your ability to focus. You've probably noticed in the modern world it feels harder and harder to stay focused. You sit down to work and within minutes your mind drifts, your phone buzzes, your motivation evaporates. There's a reason for that. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you lack willpower. It's because your brain, the most powerful focus machine in the known universe, is being hijacked by things it was never designed to handle. And the good news is, you can take it back. Your brain's focus system is wired for survival, not smartphones, and that's why it keeps getting hijacked. To understand why you keep losing focus, it's critical to appreciate that your brain is not fundamentally designed for the kind of concentrated, sustained attention that modern life demands. For thousands of years, humans lived in environments where survival depended on being highly attuned to everything happening around them. The rustle of a predator in the grass, the movement of prey on the horizon, the change in wind that might signal a coming storm. In those environments, the ability to quickly shift attention from one stimulus to another was not only useful, it was essential. The nervous system evolved to constantly monitor for novel or threatening stimuli and to prioritize them over anything else you were doing at the moment. This means that your baseline state, your default wiring, is one of vigilance and readiness to detect change rather than calm, narrow focus. When your ancestors were sitting by a fire and heard a branch crack nearby, their attention would immediately snap to the sound, because missing that signal could mean death. In the wild, sustained focus on one thing for too long could actually be dangerous. This evolutionary trait persists in your brain today, and it still influences how you respond to your environment, even though you're not sitting in a forest anymore. In a world filled with constant notifications, pings, flashing screens, and endless feeds of information, that ancient circuitry is being exploited. Each time you receive a notification, your brain registers it as something novel, a potential opportunity or threat, and your attention is pulled away reflexively. This is not a failure of willpower. It's the result of a nervous system that is working exactly as it evolved to, even though the demands of the modern environment are entirely different. Every time your phone vibrates, your brain releases a little burst of dopamine, the neurochemical associated with motivation and reward. Dopamine is not just about feeling pleasure, it's about seeking and searching. In nature, dopamine helped your ancestors hunt for food and explore new territory. It pushed them to keep moving toward goals. But in today's world, your dopamine system is being hijacked by artificial rewards, likes, texts, videos, all designed to keep you seeking without ever arriving at anything truly meaningful. These microbursts of dopamine from distractions trick your brain into thinking it's being productive, when in fact it's just chasing novelty and abandoning the deeper, more sustained focus required for real work and growth. The human prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for goal-directed behavior, planning, and self-control, is the most recent addition to your evolutionary toolkit. It's powerful, but it's also fragile and easily overridden by older, more reactive circuits. When you're faced with a potential distraction, the more primitive parts of your brain often win the battle before your prefrontal cortex has a chance to intervene. The result is that you find yourself scrolling or clicking before you even realize you've lost focus. This doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're operating in an environment full of superstimuli designed to exploit your natural attentional systems. On top of that, stress and fatigue make it even harder for your prefrontal cortex to maintain control. When you're tired or anxious, your brain shifts into a more reactive mode, favoring short-term gratification over long-term goals. That's why it feels almost impossible to focus deeply when you're underslept or overwhelmed. The very circuits you rely on to stay on task are being suppressed by your internal state. Meanwhile, your brain's salience network, which detects what's important in your environment, is being bombarded with signals of false urgency, teaching it to pay attention to trivial things at the expense of what truly matters. Understanding this evolutionary mismatch is the first step toward reclaiming your focus. You cannot simply will yourself to overcome millions of years of neural programming without changing how you approach your work and your environment. The good news is that you can train your nervous system to favor deliberate, sustained attention by first recognizing the forces working against it and then systematically reducing their impact. You can begin to quiet the noise and create conditions that make focus easier and more natural, rather than fighting your biology at every turn. Dopamine and distraction, how your reward circuits pull you away from meaningful goals. At the core of why you struggle to stay focused lies a chemical process deeply embedded in your nervous system. Dopamine is a key neuromodulator in the brain that governs motivation, drive, and the sense of reward. It is not just about experiencing pleasure, as many people think, but much more about anticipation, about the pursuit of a goal rather than the goal itself. Every time you set out to do something, whether it's writing, studying, or working on a project, your brain releases dopamine in proportion to how rewarding it believes that activity will be. This release of dopamine fuels your willingness to continue and signals that you're on the right path towards something valuable. In our evolutionary past, this system ensured that you kept searching for food, building shelter, and caring for your group, even when immediate rewards were not obvious. It kept you moving forward even when results took time to appear. In modern times, however, this ancient reward system is being hijacked. Digital devices, social media, short-form content, and notifications all provide instant hits of dopamine. Each time you get a message, a like, or even see something novel on your screen, a small amount of dopamine is released, creating a feeling of curiosity and mild satisfaction. The problem is that these microbursts of dopamine are far easier to access than the effortful, sustained work of long-term goals. Your brain begins to learn that checking your phone or clicking a link is more immediately rewarding than sticking with the hard, slow process of writing an article, learning a skill, or building a business. This is called the problem of competing dopamine rewards. The more often you indulge in these small, fast rewards, the more your brain starts to expect them. Over time, your baseline dopamine levels can actually decrease because the system becomes desensitized. When that happens, the normal, slower rewards of meaningful work feel dull by comparison, and you may even feel restless or bored when you sit down to focus. This is why, after scrolling or multitasking, it feels so much harder to get into a state of flow with your deeper work. The repeated exposure to high-frequency, high-novelty stimuli effectively trains your brain to expect more of the same, making the slower climb of real progress feel uncomfortable and even aversive. This pattern is further reinforced by the way dopamine works in cycles. When you anticipate a reward, dopamine rises, motivating you to pursue it. But once the reward is achieved, dopamine drops below baseline temporarily, creating a subtle sense of dissatisfaction or the urge to seek something else. This is a normal part of the cycle, and is what pushes humans to keep striving beyond a single success. But when applied to modern distractions, it becomes maladaptive. You check your phone, feel a little pleasure, then immediately feel the need to check again, creating an endless loop of seeking without real fulfillment. Another important aspect of dopamine is that it is tied to effort. When you exert effort towards something meaningful and challenging, dopamine tends to rise more sustainably and the rewards feel richer. This is called effort-based reinforcement. Unfortunately, easy, effortless distractions can trick your brain into thinking they are more rewarding simply because they are immediately accessible and require no work. Over time, your ability to tolerate the discomfort of effort diminishes, and you find yourself chasing low-effort, low-reward activities more and more. This is not just a psychological habit, it is a physiological reshaping of your reward circuits. Stress compounds the problem. Under conditions of high stress, cortisol suppresses the prefrontal cortex and strengthens the habit circuits of the brain, making you more likely to revert to easy, habitual behaviors that give Quick relief, so not only are you drawn to distractions because of dopamine, but you're also more vulnerable to them when you're anxious, sleep, deprived, or overwhelmed. This creates a cycle where distraction feels like the only way to cope, even though it leaves you feeling even more unfocused and unfulfilled. On top of this, the constant switching between tasks or apps depletes dopamine over time. Each switch costs a little bit of the motivation and drive that dopamine provides, and over the course of a day, this can lead to mental fatigue and what people describe as burnout or brain fog. You end up feeling less capable of sustaining effort on anything meaningful because your system is simply depleted from being pulled in so many directions. The good news is that your dopamine system is highly adaptable. By understanding how it works and making deliberate choices to favor effort-based, delayed rewards over instant gratification, you can begin to rewire your brain's circuits to favor focus. You can train yourself to tolerate the initial discomfort of sustained work and to feel satisfaction from progress instead of novelty. But it starts by acknowledging that the distractions you face are not simply harmless habits, they are powerful dopamine-driven loops that can slowly erode your capacity for focus and your motivation for meaningful goals. The myth of multitasking. Why divided attention destroys your productivity and memory. In our culture, multitasking is often seen as a skill or even a strength, something that makes you more efficient, more capable, more valuable. People pride themselves on being able to answer emails while on a conference call, check their phone while eating lunch, or switch rapidly between projects. But what neuroscience clearly shows is that what we call multitasking is not truly doing multiple things at once. Instead, it is the brain switching attention back and forth between tasks, and each of those switches comes at a significant cost. The human brain has limited attentional resources at any given moment. When you try to split those resources between two tasks, your capacity for each is diminished. This is because your prefrontal cortex, which governs focus and executive function, can only actively process one stream of complex information at a time. When you ask it to handle two or more, it toggles between them, creating a phenomenon called attention residue. Every time you leave one task unfinished and jump to another, a portion of your mental energy remains stuck on the first. This residue reduces the clarity and depth with which you can engage the next thing. The more often you switch, the more residue accumulates, and your cognitive performance deteriorates over time. Studies have shown that people who believe they are good at multitasking actually perform worse on tests of focus, memory, and problem solving. This is because the habit of dividing attention weakens the brain's ability to enter deep, sustained states of focus known as flow. Flow states are where creativity, learning, and high productivity emerge, but they require extended periods of uninterrupted concentration. When you break your attention repeatedly, you prevent your brain from achieving the level of neural synchrony and immersion needed to reach that state. Another cost of multitasking is the way it affects your working memory. Working memory is the system that holds and manipulates information in your mind in real time. It has a limited capacity, like a whiteboard you can write on temporarily. When you multitask, you overload this system, forcing it to erase and rewrite information with every switch. This increases errors, slows down your progress, and reduces your ability to recall details later. Even seemingly harmless multitasking, like listening to music with lyrics while reading, can significantly impair comprehension and retention. Your hippocampus, which encodes memories, needs your full attention to form lasting connections. When your attention is divided, the encoding is shallow and fragmented, and you are less likely to remember what you worked on. Beyond cognitive performance, multitasking also takes a toll on your emotional well-being. Constant tasks, switching can make you feel scattered, restless, and overwhelmed. Your nervous system remains in a heightened state of alert because every new task feels like a new demand or threat. This can increase levels of cortisol and adrenaline, keeping you in a stress response mode that is not sustainable for long periods. Over time, this chronic mental stress can lead to burnout and feelings of dissatisfaction, because despite being busy all day, you may feel like you accomplished little of real value. Another subtle consequence of multitasking is its impact on self-awareness and mindfulness. When your attention is divided, you are less present in each moment, less able to notice your own thoughts and feelings or the nuances of what you are working on. This reduces your capacity for insight, empathy, and creativity, which often depend on allowing your mind to fully engage with one thing at a time. You miss the deeper patterns and connections that come from sustained focus. Importantly, multitasking trains your brain to expect constant novelty. Each switch provides a tiny rush of stimulation, much like the dopamine-driven distractions from technology. The more you indulge in multitasking, the harder it becomes to sit with a single, unbroken task without feeling bored or anxious. This is not a matter of discipline alone, but of neural adaptation. Your brain starts to prefer a fractured mode of attention and resists the discomfort of stillness and focus. Repeated over weeks, months, or years, this pattern can reshape your attentional habits, making deep work feel increasingly out of reach. The myth of multitasking is perpetuated because people mistake busyness for productivity. You may feel like you are getting more done because you are touching multiple things in a short time, but the quality of your work declines, and the total time it takes to finish each task actually increases. This is called the switch cost, and research has measured it as a significant delay each time you change focus, even if only for a few seconds. Those seconds accumulate over the course of a day and can amount to hours of lost time and diminished quality of work. Understanding that your brain is not designed to multitask is the first step toward reclaiming your ability to focus. It is not a matter of weakness or lack of skill, but of working with the biology of attention rather than against it. Recognizing the hidden costs of divided attention allows you to make more intentional choices about how you allocate your focus and how you structure your work and your environment to support it. The power of deliberate focus, training your prefrontal cortex to resist impulses. At the center of your ability to maintain attention on a meaningful task is the prefrontal cortex, a region of the brain located right behind your forehead. This area is responsible for executive functions such as planning, self-control, goal-directed behavior, and most importantly, the ability to suppress impulses that are irrelevant to the task at hand. Unlike the older, more reactive parts of your brain, which are constantly scanning for novelty and potential threats, the prefrontal cortex allows you to override those reflexes and stay aligned with your intentions. But the prefrontal cortex is not a fixed, fully developed system that works perfectly by default. It is trainable, and just like a muscle, it strengthens through consistent, deliberate use and atrophies when neglected. The modern environment tends to weaken the prefrontal cortex by overwhelming it with endless cues that trigger impulsive responses. Notifications, quick reward apps, and the habit of multitasking create patterns where the reactive circuits of your brain dominate and the prefrontal cortex takes a back seat. Each time you give in to an urge to check your phone or switch tasks unnecessarily, you are reinforcing neural pathways that make it easier to be distracted the next time. Conversely, every time you deliberately resist a distraction and return to your intended task, you are strengthening the circuits in the prefrontal cortex that govern focus and self-control. This process is called top-down control, and it is a skill that can be cultivated through practice. One of the reasons deliberate focus feels difficult is because of something called attentional inertia. When you start a new task, it takes time for your brain to fully engage and synchronize its activity around that specific goal. During this early period, your mind is more vulnerable to impulses and competing thoughts. Many people interpret this discomfort as a signal that they are not motivated or that they lack discipline, but in reality, it is simply the natural resistance of the brain to settle into a single, Mode of operation. If you can push through this initial period, even for just a few minutes, you begin to build momentum, and it becomes easier to stay engaged. Over time, as you practice staying with one task despite distractions, this settling period becomes shorter and your capacity for sustained attention increases. Another reason deliberate focus can be challenging is the way your brain processes internal and external noise. Even when your environment is quiet, your mind can generate its own distractions in the form of intrusive thoughts, worries, or random memories. These arise from deeper brain structures and can feel compelling, but they are simply mental events that you can learn to observe and let pass without acting on them. This awareness is another function of the prefrontal cortex, which can notice impulses without reacting. Cultivating this awareness allows you to resist the urge to indulge every thought or external cue that arises. It gives you the space to make conscious choices rather than operating on autopilot. Training deliberate focus also involves recognizing the limits of your attentional capacity. Your brain is not designed to focus endlessly without breaks. The prefrontal cortex fatigues more quickly than other areas of the brain, and when it is depleted, you become more reactive and more susceptible to distractions. This is why structuring your work into focused intervals, separated by intentional breaks, is so effective. It aligns with the natural rhythms of your brain and allows you to sustain high-quality focus over longer periods of time. This kind of rhythm also helps recalibrate your dopamine system. When you work in short, deliberate bursts and then rest, you teach your brain to associate effort with reward in a way that builds motivation over time. You can think of each session of focused work as a workout for your prefrontal cortex. Just as physical exercise strengthens your muscles, mental exercise strengthens your ability to resist impulses and maintain attention on what matters. The more you practice, the more resilient your focus becomes. Another powerful aspect of deliberate focus is its ability to reshape your self-image. Each time you succeed in staying with a task despite distractions, you reinforce a sense of agency and confidence in your own ability to direct your mind. This builds a positive feedback loop where focus becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural state. Over time, you stop identifying as someone who is easily distracted and start to see yourself as someone who can engage deeply with what matters most. Environmental design also plays an important role in supporting the prefrontal cortex. Because this area is vulnerable to overload, minimizing unnecessary stimuli in your workspace can reduce the burden on your self-control. Removing obvious distractions, setting clear goals for each session, and creating rituals around starting and ending your work all help create conditions where deliberate focus is easier to achieve. Your nervous system responds to these cues by preparing for a period of sustained effort. Deliberate focus is not simply about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to pay attention. It is about understanding the way your brain allocates resources and creating habits and conditions that make focus the path of least resistance. By training your prefrontal cortex through repeated, intentional practice, you can transform your relationship with attention and reclaim the ability to work deeply on what truly matters to you. Daily protocols to build and protect your focus, sleep, vision, and timed breaks. The ability to maintain focus is not simply a matter of willpower or mindset, but a reflection of how well your body and brain are prepared to engage in sustained cognitive effort. Focus is a biological state, and the quality of your sleep, how you use your visual system, and the rhythm of your work and rest cycles all play a major role in determining whether your nervous system is in a position to support deep concentration. One of the most important pillars of focus is sleep. Sleep is when your brain consolidates memories, clears metabolic waste, and restores the neurotransmitter systems you depend on for attention and motivation. When you are sleep deprived even by just an hour or two, your prefrontal cortex function is impaired, making it much harder to resist distractions and stay aligned with your goals. Sleep deprivation also alters your dopamine system, reducing your baseline levels of motivation and making quick reward behaviors like scrolling or checking notifications more appealing than the slower, more effortful work of pursuing meaningful tasks. Prioritizing a consistent sleep schedule, aiming for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep each night, and maintaining regular wake and sleep times help synchronize your circadian rhythms, which regulate hormone release, alertness, and cognitive performance throughout the day. Light exposure early in the morning is another critical factor that affects your focus. When you wake up and expose your eyes to natural light, especially within the first 30 to 60 minutes of your day, specialized cells in your retina send signals to your brain that regulate the release of cortisol and dopamine, which set your level of alertness and readiness for the day. This morning light exposure also helps set your internal clock, making it easier to fall asleep at night and wake up at the right time the next morning. Without this light signal, your circadian rhythm can drift, leading to irregular energy and attention patterns and difficulty focusing when you need it most. On the other hand, exposure to bright artificial light, especially from screens, late at night can delay your circadian clock and reduce the quality of your sleep, creating a cycle of poor sleep and poor focus. Managing your visual system during the day also influences your capacity to concentrate. Your eyes are not just passive sensors, but an extension of your brain's attentional circuits. When you focus your gaze narrowly on a specific point, your brain is cued to narrow its attentional spotlight as well. This is why having a clear, clutter-free workspace and deliberately directing your gaze at your work, without constantly looking around or checking your phone, reinforces mental focus. Conversely, when you spend long periods staring at a single distance, such as a computer screen without breaks, your visual and attentional systems can fatigue, leading to eye strain and reduced ability to sustain concentration. One way to counteract this is to periodically shift your gaze to a distant object for about 20 seconds every 20 minutes, which relaxes the visual system and refreshes your ability to maintain focus when you return to the task. Another key protocol for building focus is to work in timed intervals that match your brain's natural rhythms. The nervous system is not designed to maintain peak concentration indefinitely. Research on ultradian rhythms shows that most people can sustain deep, high-quality focus for about 90 minutes at a time before needing a short period of rest. Working beyond this window without a break often leads to diminished returns, more mistakes, and increased susceptibility to distractions. Structuring your day into blocks of focused work followed by deliberate breaks allows your prefrontal cortex to recover and prepares you to re-engage fully for the next session. During these breaks, it is helpful to step away from screens, move your body, or engage in light, restorative activities that do not require heavy cognitive effort. Hydration and nutrition also play a subtle but important role in supporting focus. Even mild dehydration can impair cognitive performance, and consuming balanced meals with sufficient protein, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates helps stabilize blood sugar and maintain consistent energy levels. Sharp drops or spikes in blood sugar can leave you feeling foggy and more prone to seeking quick, unproductive distractions. Incorporating physical movement throughout your day, even in small doses, supports focus by increasing blood flow to the brain, enhancing mood, and reducing stress hormones that can interfere with prefrontal cortex function. A few minutes of stretching, walking, or deep breathing during breaks can make it easier to sustain focus during work periods. Another aspect of protecting your focus is being mindful of when you schedule your most demanding work. Most people experience their highest levels of alertness and cognitive capacity during the first few hours of the day, following their morning light exposure, and after they have fully woken up. Reserving these prime hours for your most important attention, heavy tasks, and leaving more routine or less demanding work for later in the day allows you to align your efforts with your brain's natural performance curve. Finally, creating clear boundaries around your work and rest periods helps prevent mental fatigue and preserves your ability to focus when it matters most. Allowing yourself time to fully disengage from work, especially in the evening, supports better sleep and gives your nervous system the chance to reset. Protecting your focus is not just about what you do in the moment when you sit down to work, but about how you care for your body and brain over the entire day, setting up the right internal and external conditions that make sustained attention possible and even enjoyable, designing your environment and routines to make focus your default state. The spaces you occupy and the habits you create have a profound influence on your ability to concentrate. Your brain is constantly interpreting signals from the environment to determine what is relevant, what is safe, and what deserves attention. When your environment is cluttered with competing stimuli, or when your routines are chaotic, your nervous system is forced to work harder to suppress impulses and maintain focus. On the other hand, when you intentionally design your surroundings and daily patterns to minimize distractions and reinforce clarity, focus becomes a natural byproduct rather than a constant battle. One of the most immediate ways to support focus is to remove unnecessary visual and auditory clutter from your workspace. Every item within your line of sight, every sound in the background, is processed at some level by your brain. Even if you are not consciously paying attention to them, they impose a small cognitive load, subtly pulling resources away from your primary task. A clean, organized space, with only the tools and materials you need in front of you, reduces this cognitive drag. Visual simplicity helps your mind settle into the task at hand without the constant low-level noise of competing stimuli. The same principle applies to digital environments. Notifications, open tabs, and apps running in the background all act as potential cues that can hijack your attention. Setting up your devices to minimize these interruptions, such as disabling non-essential notifications, using focus modes, or even keeping your phone out of reach, helps create a digital space that supports rather than undermines your intentions. It is not about imposing rigid rules, but about making it easier to do the right thing than to give in to impulse. Small changes to your physical environment can also cue your brain to enter a focused state. This is known as context-dependent memory. Your mind associates specific locations and conditions with certain behaviors and mental states. When you consistently work in the same place and under the same conditions, your brain learns to associate that space with concentration and productivity. This is why it can be helpful to have a dedicated work area, even if it is just a corner of a room where you only engage in focused tasks. Over time, simply sitting in that space can trigger a mental shift into a more attentive mode. Lighting, temperature, and even posture contribute to this effect. Natural light during the day supports your circadian rhythm and helps keep you alert. Cooler temperatures tend to promote wakefulness, while overly warm spaces can make you drowsy. Sitting upright rather than slouching sends signals to your nervous system that you are in an active, engaged state, which helps sustain mental effort. Beyond the physical environment, the structure of your routines plays a crucial role in making focus your default. When your days lack structure, your mind has to expend extra energy deciding what to do next, leaving you vulnerable to distractions. Establishing regular times for deep work, shallow tasks, and rest creates a rhythm that aligns with your natural energy cycles and reduces decision fatigue. Many people find it helpful to create a morning ritual that includes hydration, light exposure, and a few minutes of movement to signal to the brain and body that it is time to engage. Starting your day with your most important work before the demands of the outside world pile up often allows for the longest and most effective periods of uninterrupted focus. Planning your work periods in advance and setting clear, specific goals for each session also helps keep your mind aligned with your priorities. The more granular and actionable your goals, the less mental bandwidth is wasted on figuring out what to do next, and the more likely you are to stay on track. Writing down your goals before you begin and keeping them in your line of sight can serve as a constant reminder of what deserves your attention. Designing your environment and routines also means deliberately building in moments of recovery. Your nervous system needs time to shift out of the focused, high-effort state and into a more relaxed mode in order to recharge. Scheduling breaks between work blocks and creating evening rituals that help you wind down not only support better focus during the day, but also improve the quality of your sleep, which feeds back into your ability to concentrate the following day. One powerful strategy is to create friction for distractions and reduce friction for focus. This might mean physically moving your phone out of reach, using website blockers during work sessions, or placing healthy snacks and water nearby so you do not have to get up and wander when hunger strikes. Conversely, making it slightly more difficult to access distractions, even by just a few seconds, can often be enough to prevent you from acting on impulse. Habits are easier to form and maintain when the path of least resistance leads toward your desired behavior. Social and environmental cues can also play a part. If the people around you constantly interrupt, or if your environment is filled with noise, your ability to focus will suffer. Having conversations with those you live or work with about your need for uninterrupted time or seeking out quieter environments when necessary can help create the social support you need to protect your focus. Even wearing noise-canceling headphones or playing neutral background noise can help mask auditory distractions and create a psychological boundary between you and the outside world. Over time, the more you align your environment and routines with your goal of sustained attention, the less effort it takes to maintain focus. You begin to shift from relying on raw willpower to creating conditions that make focused work the default rather than the exception. These intentional choices accumulate, reinforcing your identity as someone who is capable of deep, meaningful work and making it easier to enter that state whenever you choose